In a previous adventure, I did the unspeakable and went from the smoky and cracked up GameCube Classic to what I call the Purple Ghost Gamecube, except now my controller no longer matches. So for today's show and tell, let's see if I can install a new controller shell without breaking anything. So, before any of the local fan groups show up to smack me upside the head, I'll just have to see how far along I can get before that. For now, let's just get all the new bits out of disposable plastics. My first impression is that this will look quite nicely next to my Purple Ghost Gamecube. The parts feel quite nice in the hand, but the surface is quite smooth, as all of it is molded details. I'd consider it quite acceptable for just plain gaming, though I could see it as being a handicap in a game of Super Smash Bros. Melee. As it's a third-party product, there's no markings, as to be expected really, having to stay invisible to the flaming eyes of the House of Mario. With that bit of knowledge, let's push on to disassembling the controller itself. As with all things Nintendo, they're put together using their own little weird driving screws. A security feature that's mostly negated by common toolkits. They do have one particular trick up their sleeve. They're really cheap, so they more or less strip instantly if you try to use anything electric. Let's get the outer screws out of there. There are 6 of them. All of them should be obvious, though maybe not on camera. A black controller isn't exactly ideal for a show and tell, but it's what I have to work with. With the screws removed, we can just lift the top off, though I would rather recommend that you turn it over and then lift the bottom of the case away from it. At least then you have a better understanding of where everything belongs. For now we'll be working on the bottom. Except for the trigger mechanisms, there isn't really much here. The internals of which are hidden under 2 black plastic pieces. And as with most things Nintendo, when we're inside we need to work with Phillips head screws. Though technically I think they're something else, probably JIS, meaning Japanese Industrial Standard. They more or less look the same, and you can probably get away with using Phillips screwdrivers, but you won't get the same fit. Just 2 of them to remove, and we're inside. Removing the plastic piece, we can get a look at the surprisingly complex mechanism. There's a spring for tension, a metal slider to keep it straight, and all of it to push down on a rubber conductive pad on the bottom. To remove, push in on the lower part of it, then tilt it down and lift away from the bottom shell. Getting the new replacement trigger, we can start transferring the parts. The tricky bit is the metal slider that's hooked onto the trigger part. It's not exactly rocket science, but knowing where everything goes makes things a lot easier to put back together. If you've been playing with it, you may find that the little conductive mat pops out, like here. Just push it back behind the little tabs and you're good. Just stop playing with it. To reinstall, just hold on to everything, compress it slightly and poke it through the hole for the trigger. As for how that actually looks, it's a bit easier to see now that we don't have it in a black case. The metal slider is in place and the conductive pad isn't hanging out of the bottom. We can push on and try to reinstall the black piece using the original screws that we removed earlier. And it might be hard to pinpoint without video, but this is the exact point where my warranty definitely went straight out the window. And if you at first don't succeed, might as well completely strip that screw all the way. Not that it helped, because that thing almost fell out by itself. So wherever they bought their screws, it's softer than this piece of plastic. Awesome. Guess I'll have to go on AliExpress and look for some 8mm screws. Let's just buy enough for everything. Looks like those will fit quite nicely. And because I haven't managed to show off every tool in my tool chest, here's a hex driver that's frequently featured on my RC channel, Basement RCs. Why anyone thought that a precision screwdriver should have a smooth metallic handle is beyond me. But in the end, plastic beats original screws, steel beats all of them. Just have to push the conductive pad back into place because I forgot I wasn't supposed to play with the triggers again. Left trigger shouldn't be quite as exciting, especially now that we've found out how to properly screw things up. That's some proper childhood uses right there. With the triggers in place, we can work on the top of the shell. The Z button is just sandwiched between the two parts of the shell, but it has a metal piece that we need to move over. Just push it in and that's all there is to it. Just pop that in temporarily, because you know that's going on the floor at some point. As for the triggers, I could have sworn those rubber things were conductive pads. Guess they just used the same mold for bump stops. As for the electronics, it should all just lift straight out. Wonder what analog sticks cost. Yeah, I want to play something this decade, so we're moving on. Out with the old and in with the somewhat new. It only goes in one way. And yes, I'll stop with the sound effects. I'm all done. Rubber mats seem kind of grubby, so I'll just clean it with some clean water. Don't use IPA because that'll degrade the rubber. As for building it up again, there's only one piece that sort of stumped me, and it's the D-pad. It has an indent on one side that I think should point towards the analog stick. At least that's the way my original controller had it. As for the other buttons, you need a hammer to get them in the wrong way. Some of the buttons did have some flash lines. Those would have definitely killed my performance in Smash Bros. Not that anyone would be able to tell, because I kinda suck at those. Pop the electronics back into place before we lose something, like the rumble motor that's hanging around here now. I guess the shaft should be pointing towards the top of the controller, and apparently the little mat fell off, so I just have to put it properly into place. Little loop of cable goes onto the peg. This is your strain relief. Everything looks and feels right, except for the Z button. That fixed, ensure that both of the analog triggers are in the upright position. Well, mostly right to you. As long as nothing feels pinched, let's push on. The original shell had these horrible tri-wing cheese-based screws. I'm not using those. Instead, I'm using the self-tapping M3 screws that I ordered previously, though I should probably say that I wouldn't use them as replacements on a original shell. This is because the threads wouldn't match and you'd just end up, well, weakening the plastic. But this is an entirely new shell, so I'm hoping to get away with it. With everything nice and over-tightened, as every amateur eventually does in the end, we can finally get a proper look at the controller. It truly is a stunning look, just about dark enough that all of the internals don't end up looking like a crammed storage box. You know, like that crystal Xbox they sold back then. Anyway, let's just zip up the remaining bits so that someone else can have them in the future. Because really I don't see myself putting it back together. Now you're probably waiting for the gaming experience, so where's 10 seconds of me racing a cat? In the hobby, there are the ones that you want to preserve. This is the second one, the one that you want to use. And now that I have a matching controller, there's nothing stopping me from enjoying countless hours on it. Well, apart from being old and having commitments. End of script. Bye.